After a UFO sighting, witnesses have reported that mysterious men wearing dark suits and hats showed up, sometimes threatening the witnesses not to ever tell what they've seen or else. If you thought Men in Black was just a movie, there's a whole historic record that goes back to the 60s, 50s, maybe even much further back than anyone ever considered before. Today on Metaphysical, we're going to go over it all, between the most famous stories you may have heard of to the ones that haven't really seen the light of day, to remote viewing data on these mysterious men. This conversation, it's about to get pretty weird. Join me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, and remote viewer John Vivanco for a metaphysical show that's going to be out of this world.
If you're listening to this metaphysical podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere else, that 5-star rating and review really helps us spread like a virus. Remember, you got to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook.
John, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. Doing
Good.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. We've been doing the podcast for a few years now, and
Yeah.
we haven't gotten into, only anecdotally, we have gotten into the Men in Black. But today, I'm pretty excited that you and I are going to have a chance to talk about some of the strangest stories we have uh, in history. And I think maybe it's one of the deeper rabbit holes that you could get into. I mean, it doesn't really end. You just keep finding weirder things and you just start wondering what's going on, because I don't think that the 1940s or the 50s is where all of this started. Well, we'll get into some of that, but what do you think, if you were going to define what the Men in Black were for the audience at home, what would you say?
Well, I mean that the phenomena covers a sort of a broad range, probably a range that most people don't know about, which we're going to go into because the phenomena can vary. Um, but to me, my first experience of understanding the Men in Black was through John Keel's work, who was an investigator in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, who coined high strangeness, who coined the term Men in Black, and he was the primary paranormal investigator behind the Mothman, and wrote the book Mothman Prophecies. So that was like my first experience in understanding about the Men in Black, and that is full on high strangeness, like bizarro world stuff. So that's where I go with it, like extremely bizarre behavior, and like what the heck are these things and what are they doing? What's their purpose? As opposed to like this thing that goes and warns people, like, you know, don't talk about your UFO sighting. Bad things will happen to you.
Which,
That's
yeah,
I
which
don't, yeah.
it's
Go ahead.
weird. That's weird enough in and of itself. But then,
Well, I don't know. Is it? I mean, that's like the government does not want people, especially like when you get
yeah,
back into the 60s and stuff, 70s, and earlier than that, that they were really trying to keep a lid on that stuff. And if there was something going on, I think that they would have been more apt to warn people, individually. No internet, people couldn't talk about it very much in general. It's like a scary person shows up at your house, tells you not to talk about it, you probably won't.
yeah, I agree. The strange thing I think about a lot of the stories is that it gets a little bit outside what you would consider to be normal government officials. It does. It goes into the land of high strangeness. I mean, when you go back and you read the original Majestic 12 documents that they say are untrue and this and that. I mean, you and I both know that that stuff is legit. The Majestic 12, which was uh, a group of men, I guess you could say, that kind of created the foundation for how to deal with UFO landings that were occurring in the United States back in early 20th century. We have um, things that seem to not be a part of what would be a normal human interaction between government officials and men. Uh, and of course, again, we're going to be getting into some of this, but the documentation that I read from the Majestic 12 really was discussing how to distract people from what was going on, essentially. These are normal art of war type methods of discrediting people coming forward with stories, certain things that they could do with propaganda. I mean, we know also that Hollywood has been doing things like this. I mean, the fact that you can't even search for Men in Black without a ridiculous amount of pages of having to see Will Smith in a suit, and Tommy Lee Jones is to some extent is I mean, why is that? Of course, it's a fun story, but so many of our original weird stories have gotten hijacked by Hollywood, and then all you're seeing is that term. You're not seeing the stuff that you're actually looking for.
Right. Yeah, it takes over the search results. It's what you think of when you think of Men in Black. I don't think of that movie when I think of Men in Black. Not at all.
Me
But most
either.
people do, right?
Correct.
Most people do because my experience with the whole Men in Black stuff was way before that movie came out. I haven't had experiences with them. Just I'm if I read a book, it's like I'm experiencing the book. So that's what I mean by that. It's
Right,
like,
sure.
yeah, yeah. So that movie, I thought it was funny, but is it the reality of the Men in Black? I mean, we'll get to this, but that's a question that you have to ask is like these movies that come out in Hollywood, is it a soft disclosure or is it hiding something else?
Well, I think one of the cornerstones of propaganda related to this type of content is that if the story is already out there and it's fictional, the reality won't shock people as much and they won't even pay attention to it.
I don't know about that with this.
Well, the Men in Black, though, making it just out there and ridiculous and this whole
Yeah,
funny
yeah, yeah,
concept,
yeah.
and
Right.
then you hear a story about real Men in Black with, skin that's nearly falling off coming to threaten someone about a UFO sighting. It's
Yeah,
you think it's ridiculous, you know?
right.
But John Keel, back to John Keel, I think for those of you at home, John Keel really was the first guy to really start putting things together on this. And a very, very interesting character. And there is a lecture that you can watch from 1989. You can probably find it on YouTube. John even sent me one the other day where he's discussing general research that he's done over the years on the Men in Black and who the Men in Black are.
Because the Men in Black is a generic term. It doesn't cover just the Men in Black in black Cadillacs who arrive at the scene of UFO incidents. As I'll describe to you later, there are all kinds of Men in Black. They're mystery men, and we don't know who they are, where they come from, or who's supporting them. And some of these people apparently have a lot of logistical support and financial support that's very mysterious.
What he is saying, and from the original source, it's interesting, is a lot different than some of the encounters that we've heard with this like pale skin, hairless, threatening tall men dressed in a suit. Sometimes the suits are off or they don't fit quite right, or they're dressing in the 1940s and it's the 80s and things like
Right.
that.
Some
They're
of them were
showing up
really
in
short too. Some of them were really short, like under 5 feet, like 4 feet 6, 4 feet 3.
weird,
Some of them were
really.
very short. Yeah. One of the things is that they would mostly all wear the same kinds of shoes with big soles and waffled kind of soles. So that was something that people had noticed about these characters. Black Cadillacs, pull up in a black Cadillac.
Yeah, an old black Cadillac.
That was in pristine condition, like 30-year-old car or something from the time that, 30, 40-year-old car, pristine condition. Did you know that when John Keel started reporting on the black Cadillac, they changed to Volkswagens?
He mentioned that they
Yeah.
showed up in Volkswagens.
So they were watching him.
For sure. And it's always interesting when you think about people being monitored back in the 60s just because it was so much more difficult. You had to have a
Right.
hard line tap in order to
Right.
be listening to everything they were saying. And some of the things in some of these stories, there would be no way for these people to know what it, it alludes to there being other devices that they were using to monitor that have nothing to do with our current systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, because some people had a UFO sighting and they hadn't reported it yet. Then they would get visited, even in not reporting it.
Right. Right. I mean, how would
How
anyone
would
know?
whoever know?
They
Yeah.
hadn't talked about it yet. They had just seen it. They thought it was strange, and then there's a knock on the door, you know, with a tall.
Or there's a weird note with burned edges and it's misspelled and it has horrible punctuation of "do not talk about what you've seen" or whatever, and it's slid under the door. I mean, stuff like that too, like
Yeah.
very bizarre stuff. A lot of these encounters, these Men in Black. Well, the Air Force, I think it was an Air Force colonel, showed up and was going to interview some people who saw a UFO. He was wearing the wrong shoes. He's wearing sneakers with an Air Force uniform. Things are slightly out of place, and they offered him a bowl of Jello, and he tried to drink the Jello. Right. So you have situations like that with these Men in Black that are just off kilter, and they ask very bizarre questions. Sometimes they ask questions that have nothing to do with anything they've seen at all. Nothing. There was one case where somebody had a pen and they were writing things down as they were conversing with one of the Men in Black, and the man in black stopped speaking and was just staring at the pen, like kind of in awe, and was, pointing at the pen. And so the person said, "You can have it if you want it," and gave the man in black the pen, and he cackled and laughed and ran off.
So wait
So
a
we have
minute.
these,
Wait a
like,
minute.
really crazy stories of these beings, people doing things that are,
So what you're saying is you don't drink Jello, John?
don't drink Jello. Before it's set, yeah, I like to drink. I drink Jello before it's set. That's the best way to have Jello.
That's in your stomach, right?
Right.
Okay, so there's many stories we're going to be getting into today. There's no way to cover all of the stories, but before
Yeah.
we do, there was a few things that were really interesting that John Keel pointed out about these Men in Black experiences that I think it would be interesting to go over, which is that most commonly in our lore, Men in Black are considered to be these pale individuals, with very white skin, tall, strange looking, hairless. One of the things that John Keel kept saying over and over is that not only were the people that he was interviewing saying that they looked angular, slightly Asian, not Asian, slightly Asian, almost like a cross between white the white race and the Asian race put together. And he used the example of the Lapland people in northern Sweden, which is, if you look at when the like for instance, the Mongolian race and the Russian race, you get a lot of people looking like this in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, the Lapland people, where it's that kind of mix where they still look Asian, but they have also some white features. These were the type of people that experiencers were claiming that they had been seeing. Now, they weren't just seeing them as Men in Black. There were people claiming when they saw a UFO and they were looked through the UFO that they saw whoever the pilot was in the UFO looking similar to this as well, which is very strange. And it was darker skin. It wasn't light skin, like not the pale light skin that we keep hearing about in more modern times between 1940s and 2008 2012, right? um yeah, what do you think about that, John?
There was a Keel had spoken about a press conference that was, I think, in the maybe 1950s, late 1940s, of a Air Force general basically said, no, the the UFOs are not flown by Spaniards. I think he said Spaniards, and it threw everybody. It's like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Well, there were a lot of reports of people seeing some of the occupants of UFOs, and they thought they were Spaniard people because they had a, sort of a darker olive skin complexion, and so you get that as well in a lot of the lore, especially the older lore. Like it was weirder back then. I mean, it was like a weird, more. It was different than what we have today. What we have today, when we think of aliens and UFOs, we think of the typical gray with the
Yeah.
almond shaped eyes. It's like that has completely taken over UFO lore. And before that, it was like, hey, we're from Venus, and they're Aryan white people, blonde hair, or we're Venusians, or we're from some weird planet that you don't know of, but we're all like some version of you, and we look like you. Maybe Spanish, maybe Asian, maybe white person, and
Tall,
then they
white,
were like the
Nordic.
Space Brothers, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, it's the Space Brothers, like Adamski and stuff, like would write books about the Space Brothers and go on trips with the Space Brothers and sisters. And nowadays it's like, well, this all has to do with abductions, and it
Mm.
has to do with these creepy non-human type entities that are so how did that
Yeah.
take over what was in the past? And then Men in Black are part of that whole past genre, because I don't necessarily think that stuff is happening now, at least in the way that it was happening then, right?
Yeah.
And so
People
to
are
me,
people are
that
seeing UFOs every day now.
they're seeing UFOs every day because the government told them, number one, it's okay now to look at UFOs and to say, hey, there's a UFO, but hey, no, we're going to call them UAPs because UFO is, well, that's got the baggage of the aliens.
Yeah.
But that's what it's all about, right? And so at UAP, you've incorporated the idea of a drone into it, right? As well. So you've got now this whole other world of it that they're trying to control the narrative around. When to me, no, 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 they are UFOs, unidentified flying objects, and the baggage exists of
Mm.
aliens flying the craft. We should not shift to UAP. Or if we do, we should have the whole alien stuff involved in it, because that's mostly what it is. So people have been told it's okay now to believe in it, and so everybody's looking up, right? Everybody's looking up now and trying to figure it out, especially after the New Jersey drone stuff and
Mm.
whatnot. So, but I've always had that big question. Like the Men in Black come from that era of UFO. Now, I'm not saying that it's not happening now, but it was more prevalent. At least those are the stories that you heard were more prevalent back then. Back when it was like there were not really any grays. There were grays. People would talk about them, but it was more about these space brothers and sisters that were human-like, but off and weird. What happened to that? Where did that go? Right?
Happened
I
to
mean,
that.
that's a really interesting era in UFO research that I get really stuck on.
Yeah, and I mean you should. It's I often say this, human beings are a race of people that it's like they have, I think Graham Hancock even says that they have amnesia. They but they're in denial to some extent too. And even 2 weeks can go by and everyone forgets what happened 2 weeks ago. Never mind 30
Right,
years,
right.
And so okay, I've watched so many videos on YouTube. I've read so many articles, more recent articles on the Men in Black just recently. Nothing is really as interesting as the original John Keel material because it's so odd. It's more odd than all of even though the stories are very strange. Don't get me wrong. They're kind of creepypasta strange, that kind of strange. But this is a weirdness where you're thinking exactly what you said. What happened to all of this? I mean, and why furthermore, are our researchers who are publishing information on the Men in Black not going back to John Keel and the origin of these stories to understand them better? Because there's a lot more stories than just the weird stuff. There's obviously maybe different groups that people are putting into the Men in Black category that have nothing to do with one another. There's governmental groups that are potentially even fighting with one another, more clandestine CIA type things, maybe the US Air Force uh, that's looking after some of this. And then you have the weird stuff where people are impersonating those officers, going to people's homes and, screwing with people essentially. Uh,
Right. Right. Well, you have there's a psyop around this, and when you have a phenomena occurring, that's a genuine phenomena, you are going to have, and people are noticing it, and it's breaking the laws of accepted reality. You are going to have psyops around these things, and they're going to be used in order to push the narrative in a different way, or they're going to be used undercover, so they can do whatever they need to do, right, under cover of this narrative. And so some of the Men in Black stuff, now there is a contingent of Men in Black stuff that is truly anomalous, truly high strangeness, but then a lot of it around it is not,
mm,
is basically a psyop, or it's being used as a cover for intelligence agencies to run with.
yes. Yeah. I think maybe we should get into a few of the more famous stories just to kind of
Mm-hmm.
hash it out a little bit. Because there's some notable stories here and some that people even haven't talked about that go back as far as I think 1665 that we need to talk about, because I think all of these are have the same context and they're a mystery. Uh,
1665. You
Actually, you
serious?
want to hear that one now? I'll tell you right
Yeah,
now.
I want to hear
Okay,
that.
because the you have to understand that most people think that the Men in Black started around the 1940s or the 1950s. Okay, that they travel in threes. They're strange. They probably coincide with the Roswell landings, and that all of this is coming from some type of bizarre governmental agency, right? But there are historical accounts where you may question that narrative quite a bit. And I'm going to tell you one of those stories right now. In uh, September 4th, 1665, there were villagers in Massingham. I believe this is in Britain somewhere. Okay. They saw really strange lights in the sky swooping and surrounding the countryside for over an hour. Now, what you have to understand is that this area, the way I understood this story is that this area is a very small village and people were very unfriendly to outsiders. And if you were an outsider, you'd get questioned, maybe even interrogated about what you were doing there, probably to protect the other people in the village. It was a more dangerous time, 1665, you have to understand, right? Now, everybody sees these lights in the sky. Nobody knows what's going on, right? After this, three strangers appeared in the village the next day. They were all very pale skinned and they were dressed head to toe in black. These three men started to ask questions to the villagers about what people had seen in the sky, right? Now, because it was such a small population and you would get interrogated when you go there, one of these guys starts to interrogate one of these men in black who's questioning them. Immediately, the guy is crippled by some unknown force, and he felt like the inside of his head was filling up with water. He couldn't move, which is a strange way to describe what was happening to you. So basically, shocked patrons who were observing this emptied out into the courtyard. One stranger basically said, the sky, they came in, right? Said, "Speak no more of what you've witnessed in the sky yesterday evening." Then, after this, the three of them just start walking back towards the woods where the woods are, away from the village, and disappear into the woods. Okay. Every person in this village, the way it's described is like any man who could walk basically starts looking for these three guys with weapons because obviously they attacked one of the villagers and you don't do that in this village, right? And no one could find them. They escaped or disappeared into the woods. And one of the strange things is that the one of the farmers who saw these guys disappearing into the woods, thought that they were werewolves or something, or warlocks. And for as long as the history of that village went on, they would always call that the Day of the Warlocks,
Huh.
something to that effect.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's strange. Now, there's a story from the same year on the English-Scottish border, and that claimed that two pale-skinned, darkly clad men attacked a farm after being unsatisfied with the recollections of a shooting star earlier that month. So, just a few months earlier, there was another sighting in the sky, and these pale guys showed up at this farmer's home and started to bully them about what they saw.
And it's interesting because it's like it's the exact same stories, same type of thing happening. I mean, how any way to verify? Yeah, no way to verify the story. It's so old, but this is something
No.
that's been handed down from this.
Yeah.
Wow, I
Yeah.
wonder what it originally like. I wonder where the story originally showed. Like, like how did people attribute this story to that town at that time? Right. That's a very curious
I
thing.
myself wanna know that. I mean, I've heard what's strange. Okay, now you gotta check this out, okay? Because this is something we need to look into a little bit more. But there is a history of course, criminals impersonating officers to do things to get things. So it's hard to find this information, right?
Yeah.
But there was an occurrence in Britain between the early 1800s, very early, like 1800 to 1803 ish, to about 1880, where people in London were seeing something they called spring-heeled Jack. And I've told you about him before, but we never really got into it. And this rabbit hole with the Men in Black brought me back to Spring-Heeled Jack, because what was so strange about this entity, I don't know what to call it, guy screwing around and trolling people, or an actual serious uh specter of some sort, is that he dressed in a very refined black cloak, and when he would show up people's houses and demand something, people couldn't necessarily always see his face. They thought he was a police officer.
Right.
And then he would do strange things like assault people. And then the reason why they called him Spring Heel Jack is he would literally jump 9 feet into the air onto a roof to escape, which obviously is not something a normal person does. And now, the reason why I said it goes back to the early 1800s is in the very early 1800s, people were seeing this thing called the hammerhead ghost or something like that, which was this weird white pale skin thing that people were getting assaulted by when they would walk through I think it was called the Hammerhead Church in this part of London. And so that happened until those occurrences were happening until like the 1820s. And then all of a sudden, Spring Heel Jack is seen, I think it was in the 1820s up until the 1867, 1880, something like that. And he's opening his coat. There's fire coming out of his mouth. There's some type of lantern mechanism. He has like metal claws. Weird stuff. Super weird stuff. And of course, we're talking about Brits in the 1880s. Super interesting. And the fact that some people were claiming he was dressed up like a police officer and then doing these things is also
Right.
quite
Right.
mysterious, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, the 1600s, you know, that's very strange. I mean, there's occurrences that go back around this. I'd like to be able to have even more time to look into this more. But that's the furthest back I could find anything up to now, right? And then fast forward, let's just say to around 1947, June 21st, 1947, we have Harold Dahl, who honestly could have been the case that inspired the Men in Black movies. Harold Dahl, there's basically two harbor patrolmen, Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman, and Dahl's young son, and they were all boating on Puget Sound when they saw what they described as 6 donut shaped flying machines, which spewed out a great quantity of a slag like substance. One piece of this slag killed Dahl's dog. Another injured the boy's arm because there was a child on board with them, and the boat was badly damaged by this barrage. This incident did not even appear in the papers until several days later. But the very next morning, before Dahl and this guy Chrisman really had a chance to spread their tale at all, a late model car pulled up in front of Dahl's house, and a mysterious stranger joined them for breakfast. And when I say join them, this guy was trying to get into his house, and one of the stories I heard was he didn't want to let this weirdo into his house, so he's like, let's just go to a diner down the street or whatever. They all go to a diner, and uh and Dahl said that the man was about 40 years old. He's wearing a dark business suit. Sat down, told Dahl precisely what happened that day. Okay, so this guy who's sitting down with Dahl is telling him precisely what happened that day, almost as if he had been there. And then he very sternly warns these guys to keep quiet about the whole affair if they value their jobs and family. Now, the
Right.
guy doesn't even identify himself. Dahl never sees the guy again. U.S. Air Force did not formally set up any kind of UFO investigating project until several months later. We know that from documentation. Hundreds of people in this Tacoma, Seattle area reported sightings in the following days after this incident, but it was branded the Maury Island hoax because much of the slag fell onto Maury Island. 3 days after the incident, Private pilot Kenneth Arnold sighted 9 flying discs near Mount Rainier, and he's credited with focusing national attention on the presence of flying saucers in the sky, not Dahl.
Right. 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 Yeah. The doll thing was not Men in the like strangeness Men in Black. I you know we had looked at that one.
You did.
Yeah. That one. So even John Keel came to the conclusion that that
He,
one
he thought it was fake. Yeah.
was faked because of the Hanford nuclear power plant where they were developing nuclear material for the atom bomb back then. And so there were apparently like 16 spies that were caught that were associated with Hanford selling the information on what the Americans were doing with the smashing of the atom and creation of the atom bomb. And so this is in Seattle area. So this is not too far from Hanford in general. So there was a lot of spy craft and stuff going on. And he relates it to this probably just the overbearing kind of intelligence, probably CIA, or I don't even know if they existed back then, OSS or whatever.
But it sounds like Foo Fighters is what he was seeing in the sky.
Right. Foo Fighters. I mean, there's other instances where slag and weird stuff has come off of craft, copper, and all sorts of strange things as well. So he had a legit sighting. It was definitely a legit sighting, but as far as data around that goes, it seemed to be warning from just humans, like in intelligence with that particular incident, not the high strangeness kind of
What's
scenario.
okay, true, but what's strange is how did they find those guys? Think about it. intelligence must have been very good even back then if our own intelligence say, "Hey, there was a guy on a boat,
Yeah.
find out who it was and show up at his place tomorrow morning." By the
Yeah.
time that was
Right.
hours after the incident,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty impressive even
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, who the heck knows how they found him? Um, who knows? He could have talked to some people and they went into like figure out if maybe they saw it too, and they saw other people who saw it. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, data around that was just, it was more terrestrial, legitimate event, just terrestrial interaction.
Mm. Okay, here's probably the second most famous case, I think, around Men in Black by Albert Bender. This is in 1952, a few years after this event. He is a former U.S. Air Force serviceman turned author and amateur ufologist. His name's Albert K. Bender. He set up an organization called the International Flying Saucer Bureau to investigate and report on strange UFO activity being witnessed all over the world at that time. He started publishing a weekly newsletter to about, it grew really fast. It was almost about 2,000 people worldwide. And in early 1953, Bender suddenly mysteriously shut down the newspaper, which was really weird because the guy was going full tilt on this. He was going to create the first of its kind UFO conference where like minded people could come and share stories, and it would be a yearly annual thing. He's starting to ramp up what he's saying in his newsletters, explaining that he's going to reveal many amazing things at this conference. And then just like that, all of a sudden, he publishes the final newsletter and it has this message that says, "We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious." Of course, there was more to the message, but that was the final sentence in it, which is obviously strange. And then his colleagues were saying that there was very odd demeanor by him at the time where he seemed like he was getting very agitated and nervous, like someone scared the heck out of him.
Right.
He wasn't
Right.
sleeping, he wasn't eating properly after shutting it down. This is the strangest thing too, is he was pretty determined to kind of keep going. So even though he was getting all kinds of messages and things that he should stop, you know, he kind of just was like, let me just keep doing this, let me keep going, you know. And yeah, he started suffering from unbearable headaches around this event. And it doesn't make any sense because the dude was extremely healthy. He's in his 30s at the time, right? And yeah, he's not he's not functioning properly, right?
Right.
And in
So
1960, okay, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
he was visited by Men in Black. Is that what?
Yeah, so okay, so at first no one knows why he stopped this entire thing, right? Then basically 10 years later, he finally opens up and he explains what happened. And he said that he was visited by three men in black who appeared basically out of thin air, forced themselves into his home, and warned him not to continue his work on the UFOs, or that from what I remember, that his wife would not be so pretty anymore. Something to that effect.
His wife would not be so pretty anymore. Hey, you stop it. Your wife will be not pretty anymore.
Obviously, they probably said it a little bit smarter than I just did.
I'm really skeptical about a lot of this stuff, just in
Mm,
general, because I mean, even today, like you just sent me something, actually. It was a podcast that shut down, that decided it was going to have its last episode,
yeah.
and basically outing certain people in the field who are basically all controlled by government on the so-called disclosure, and saying that they, realize now that this whole thing is a controlled theater operation of disclosure by the government, and that there are very it's very dangerous and very dark. And that's how it's always been within the UFO world. It's always been that way. It's always been very dangerous if you get to a certain place. Always. People have disappeared, people have died, uh, un, literally by the hands of the people that hold this in the highest level of classification. Those are the people. Those are actually the people that you have to be worried about if you get too close to reality and truth on this and you have a large audience. You have to, right? So now what's happening is that the Disclosure World Project is trying to contain and control and take over the narrative and pull it away from people like us, from people who are doing other people who are doing legitimate research. Because in the past, it was like, I'm just going to make a newsletter and I'm going to advertise the newsletter in the back of newspapers across the country or something, right? In magazines. Sign up for the UFO Newsletter Guild, right? Send me your stories, stuff like that, you know? And so, like, someone like John Keel, for instance, was putting all these pieces together and seeing patterns across the country because of doing things like this and being a reporter and getting contacts. And that was the internet in a sense back then. That was the networking, right? And so these people were more small. They were like in a smaller world and they were more isolated. Now you have a lot of people focusing on it. So if the government can throw in these stories, these red herrings, and then control the narrative and take people down, which you can do on the internet because voices get very loud and they can be pushed by algorithms, then they can control it. But I think there were things back then where they couldn't control it as much, or they're trying to figure out how to control it. So, like I say, I get a little skeptical about some of these kinds of stories. Um, yeah, he says they appeared out of thin air. Well, yeah, because look, if I'm just like playing devil's advocate, I can go down the path of saying these guys were CIA or they were intelligence operatives, and they made it seem mysterious because
Trying
this
to
has
take him
already
out.
been happening. The weird
Right.
stuff with Men in Black, they can make it seem like they are of that ilk. That is the paranormal, weird, dangerous MIB side. That is, will try to drink Jello, and have the person ascribe it to that. Right? They're already paranoid, but so that's why I'm so super skeptical of these stories. I think it's the government in a lot of these cases.
Okay, well, okay, but listen to this, okay? Because there is an expanded version of this story, and some of the details might change your mind. So
Okay,
let me
okay.
let me let me explain, okay? So now you have to understand this guy is organizing and spending a lot of time trying to set up this whole conference and everything, right? So he's living in Virginia at the time. He's got a 3-story house, and he does all of his work in the attic, right? He's getting these phone calls, and when he gets these phone calls and they come in, it's incapacitating his body. He can't even go back up into the attic. He's starting to
So
get these
there's some
weird,
sort of sonic,
there's some
there's sound.
weird Havana syndrome type of sonic thing
Right.
going on where he's starting to feel the effects from this whole thing, right? Now, um, extreme dizziness, pounding head, lost sense of his balance. One call left him so dazed again he was unable to return to the attic. Now, oftentimes what he would do is uh, he had this routine apparently of going to the cinema, maybe every Friday, something like that, right? On his way home from the movies one night after midnight, he just felt like he was being stalked or something. He was being followed. He heard footsteps, but he didn't see anything. But they were undeniable footsteps, right? Now he sees one of these men in black. It's a very tall and thin, pale white, super odd appearance. In his words, thing had an unearthly look, like a facsimile of a person rather than real flesh and blood, right? A copy of a person. He sprints home, locks the door, checks down like all of the downstairs windows, makes sure that they're locked. I think he had someone else in the home with him. They were all trying to make sure that the doors were locked. He goes back to the attic and he finds all of his papers are ransacked, scattered on the floor, etc. Now, he tells his family and friends that his home has been invaded. The phone calls after that ceased. Now, there's a lull in this period of these events. He's working really hard in this conference. He decides to benefit or to give himself, a little break and go to the movies again. So he walks to the movie theater. I guess it was within walking distance. And he went to a much earlier screening so that he could walk home in the sunlight just in case, right? During the movie, Men in Black sat down next to him, and he's or near him, like just staring at him during while he's watching the movie. And he's totally paralyzed with fear, and out of the corner of his eyes, he sees this staring figure just inches away, I guess, right? So while this is going on, the figure just gets up and leaves, but was still staring from the doorway of the cinema or whatever. So he runs out the other exit of where the guy is standing, and he sprints home. Obviously, the guy was trying to intimidate him, and he then in his newsletter promises a startling revelation that is going to come at this first annual conference. And then he was probably, I mean, I think he was going to discuss the Men in Black. I don't know for sure. Okay, so then the bullying kind of ceased after that. Uh, and and then all of a sudden, he just stops the newsletter entirely. And the full quote is: "The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we have been advised in the negative. We advise those who engage in saucer work to be very cautious."
Yeah, I mean, I'm still look, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. If I'm an intelligence officer and I have, psyop operations to run on UFO groups, and there's lore within the field of Men in Black, and I don't want people to know that this is a government operation and these are humans doing this, I would get some weird looking people, put some white pancake makeup on them, make them stand around people's houses
No,
outside
you're
dressed in
you're
black.
totally right.
I
You're
mean,
totally
that's what I
right.
would do, right?
Okay, so what happens is, because I didn't tell you exactly what happened because this is the expanded story, right? This is what he
Okay.
didn't reveal until 1962. So he's confronted by three identically tall men in black. One was a man in the cinema. One now they they come to his home. This is what I understand. They flash a government badge. They push him into his house. They ushered him into the living room where they informed him he was to cease any and all UFO investigations. Now, the men are in black suits, threatening expressions on their face. They walk in, they make demands, and the three men who know that what the saucers really are fixing basically this ice cold stare at you, right? That's what's going on. So the man who'd been following him all summer stated his colleagues would harm him if he continued publishing info on UFOs. So the men in black basically said they would harm him. So next month or so after this guy Bender is experiencing bouts of extreme dizziness, sickness, headaches, memory loss, lethargy. He didn't believe the men in black were government agents. The men in black told him they were not from this earth. That's what happened, whether it's
Right.
true or not.
Right. Well, so I have a reason for not. I see. I like. Okay. I have a reason. I have my own reasoning for not believing a lot of the stories when the men in black are being threatening, and we'll get to that.
Mm.
But I think first we should probably go more like dig into the John Keel stuff.
Yes, and with that said, we won't be sharing that here because on the next podcast, we're going to keep going into the men in black, and John's going to reveal more about what he's thinking. And we're going to go into a lot more stories on this and try to explore this because the stories do, in fact, get weirder and weirder. And just bizarre stories, if they're true. And hopefully some of them are. John's going to reveal that on the next episode. If you like this episode and want more, please consider supporting our work by pledging on our website, themetaphysical.tv.
Yeah, with your help, we can make more episodes, more merch, which Rob designs himself, and more exclusive videos. And you can also get a bag of delicious metaphysical coffee if you want your mornings to be interstellar.
And remember to like and subscribe to help the channel grow as well. And with that, we hope you thought this episode was out of this world.